Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Alright, so a very warm welcome to everyone joining us on this edition of ThePrint softcover. And today we have a very interesting book that talks about information warfare and perception management in the digital era. And we have the book's two authors with us, Shivam Shankar Singh and Anand Venkat Narayan. Shivam, Anand, thank you so much for joining us on this edition of ThePrint softcover.
Thank you for having us.
Hey, thank you for having us.
So the tradition is that we unveil the book as we speak, so that's what I'm going to do now and show the audience what the book is like. Here we go.
Perfect.
So the name of the book is The Art of Conjuring Alternate Realities, How Information Warfare Shaped Your World. So to begin with, some of the questions I had, Shivam, I'll start with you. Why write this book? Like, what was the purpose of writing this book?
So the world is actually going through a massive transformation right now. What we realized was, if you look at prehistory, humans attained power through military force and strength. If you had more people, if you had a bigger army, you usually dominated and controlled the region, the tribe. Then power shifted to economic might. What happened was, if you look at the history of colonialism, then the richer countries basically had more power and started controlling other nations, started controlling systems within. The richer parties, the richer companies started controlling the politics of nations. This is again transforming right now. And what's happened is now power is dependent on your ability to shape the information environment. Whoever controls what information people see, whoever controls what reality you believe in and what reality you live in is going to get power. This is true for domestic politics, in the sense that a political party who's able to construct a reality for people is going to come into power. This is also true of geopolitics. If you look at what happened during Russia's interference in the US elections, it's not like they hacked the voting machines. They actually hacked the people's mind by conjuring a reality for the voters. So this has become an extremely pertinent topic for us to explore and understand, because this will determine the next 40, 50, 100 years that we are going to live in.
Anand, if I could come to you, what was your purpose in contributing or deciding to co-author this book? I know you're a cybersecurity expert and you've written extensively, especially on the nuclear power plant incident here in India that was last year, I believe.
That is correct.
Why write this book?
Oh, this, see, cyber has always been about, not about machines, it's more about people, right? Not many people actually understand that in the space where I had worked, which is on offensive security and defensive security, it is not about going and hacking systems. First and foremost, all computer software is basically thought processes expressed in a machine executable format, right? And you go find problems in the way in which people think, and then you exploit it. You can design the most secure system, which is the case even at the nuclear power plant, when they came and said, look, we don't allow internet access, okay? But all the North Koreans did was send a very nice looking paper called Thorium Reactor XYZ, send it to Mr. Bharadwaj and Mr. Kakodkar. They happily clicked it, and the malware jumped into their systems, right? So you think about the most secure system. At the end of it, the vulnerability is not on the system. The vulnerability is on people's mind, right? And this has always been true in cybersecurity for close to now 50 years. But it has become more and more prevalent of late. So when we looked at it and says what other kind of vulnerabilities that people have, most of the people in cyber offense and defense are shifting towards humans than towards systems, right? And so you come back and look at Godmen, like how I can basically create an AI Godman who can speak perfect Gyan without any understanding except going through someone's tweets. Is another example that we had actually worked out in chapter 1. And then you go look at political parties, you go look at geopolitics. Most of cyber is basically on, say, geopolitical level. right? I mean, elections and being and so on and all. So Shivam's interest was most on elections and stuff like that. Mine is most on people and how they think about it. So it's been going on in our head for close to 5 years. We had been working together as late as early as 2017, 18, when I was mostly talking about Aadhaar and Shivam was mostly talking about elections. We basically peer reviewed each other's work to present in a big data conference. And then we kept in touch. And over a period of time, it kind of became very obvious to both of us that our fields are intersecting.
Yeah, it's actually a major surprise to a lot of people, but the techniques that cyber scammers use and the techniques that religious godmen use to create a cult following and the technique that political parties use to manipulate people's thoughts and opinions, it all actually fits into a very good framework, and a lot of them are the same techniques.
And education makes no difference. The more educated you are, the more vulnerable you are to propaganda. In fact, the less educated you are, the less vulnerable you are to propaganda. So it's kind of very weird, the spaces where we had operated on. And if you look back, even most of the cyber scammers, they actually target rich people more because rich people are more vulnerable to saying that I'm going to give you a free ticket to Goa, and then they happily tell their OTPs. Okay, you would never see a poor person doing it. So me and Shivam thought about it and said, look, all of this fits a very nice narrative and a pattern. And the pattern is consistent across a variety of use cases and stuff like that. And so the book came over 3 years of working together and talking with each other. And we never felt the need, but we just had a bunch of anecdotes and stories, which we used to tell to each other to amuse ourselves. And at some point of time in the pandemic, we said, let's do something serious about it rather than just chatting with each other on WhatsApp. So that's how the book came.
So I went through the Twitter timelines of both of your accounts, and I realized that you speak more recently about Apple's decision to go through child sexual abuse material scanned for CSAM content through Apple devices. So to begin with that, and then you also link that up to a part in the book that talks about capturing devices of reality creation, if I'm not mistaken. I think.
Yeah.
All right. Tell me about how do you feel about Apple's decision to do this? You said you didn't think that tech companies would fall in line so quickly. How does all of this fall into this whole thing of capturing people's minds and perception management?
So a huge war is going on right now between tech companies and governments, and this is true across the world. Like, this isn't just the case in India. So if you look at what the government is trying to do with Twitter and WhatsApp, and to get them to agree to legislation which allows the government control, the issue is that these major tech companies and major social media giants and major platforms, they are immensely powerful. They are sovereigns of the digital world. They're as big as national governments when it comes to the budget and when it comes to the power that they have over people's thoughts and people's minds. The government across the world is trying to take this power back from these tech companies for their own purposes. They want people to, they basically want to control the political reality and the geopolitical reality. And these devices that people have in their hands are a gateway into getting into people's minds, because people's opinions and the information that they get usually comes through the devices that they hold in their hands these days. So if you take control of this, then you essentially control a person's minds, their thoughts, the information that they receive. So there is a slow creep that happens. No political entity is going to go out and say that, okay, we want to control the reality that people see. So what's going to happen is that they're going to introduce things linked to, okay, we are going to just implement this one thing to control terrorism, this one thing to handle child sexual abuse material. But eventually these technologies do get repurposed for political targeting. Anand would probably be better equipped to handle the tech component of this.
Okay. So if you really look at it, no, at the end of it, in the original era, we had newspapers. So one way in which you can basically control what people think about is to put a gun on the newspaper owner's head and say, thou shalt write what I want you to write, or else you're going to go to jail, right? And we have seen this played around for quite some time in the recent past, in the recent future. But if you look at it, it is the same thing that you see on Twitter and WhatsApp. You can put a gun on the guy who's running the country and say, you're going to go to jail if you don't delete some of the tweets that my person doesn't want to see, or you have to put the tweets that my person wants to see, right? And so this is what we call as intermediary problem, in the sense that something is out there in the world and you are a consumer, right? I mean, you can't see a lot of it yourself. So you rely on intermediaries. Newspaper, magazine, publishers are intermediaries. And this is basically what we call as pre-internet era publishing companies. Okay, I mean, it is not, it is what it is. In the post-internet era, which is the 2000s and the millennial thing, most of what you read and see is basically coming from devices and platforms, right? And so you come back and say, like, how does controlling the newspaper industry is going to work for geopolitical purpose and for power capture? The answer is no. So you go back and say, very interesting. How do I let go? How do I capture your mind? And if you look at the movie Inception, one way is to basically ask yourself to undermine yourself. Rather than someone putting a gun, you just undermine yourself. And so in this case, what they come back and tell you is that, look, can you just let go of a little bit of your control on your device? Because, oh my God, horrible sexual abuse of children, right? And as a human being, you just can't not respond to it. As a parent, I also feel very attracted towards those arguments emotionally, but I'm just seen enough to see the stupidity of it. And so you do it one step at a time, one step at a time, and one step at a time. And before you know it, you would be in a position to censor what a cartoonist, what the government says as a cartoon picture is basically anti-national, right? And the moment you press share, you will be repelled to the government saying this person is actually sharing an anti-nationalist cartoon. And that's really the scope creep that you would go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You wouldn't see number 1 and say it's bad. You would then look at number 5 and say, oh, holy hell, but at number 5 you're already gone. That's usually the narrative control part that plays on devices and in all this kind of spectrum. You could see many such things in the world. And the question that we always ask ourselves is anything and everything that is doing giving you more power and control to the human being, or it is giving more power and control to a state, or it is giving more power and control to a technology corporation? Because remember, cyber is different in the sense that it is just not the government that is after your head. It is also a lot of non-state actors after your head. And that's really the important part why we come back and tell that devices is one way in which this whole fracas plays out. And so you have a three-party stalemate, you, the technology corporations, and the governments, right? And all the three are basically playing a very weird, what is a Mexican standoff? Everyone is trying to get some part of everyone. And you have this weird game. And this is our way of saying that, look, this is a weird game. Just understand it. Where are you in it?
All right. And the other question I had was about the Pegasus scandal. Once again, I think, Anand, you had said perhaps this book predicted the coming of Pegasus or the revelations, because there was this part that I think Shivam had highlighted from the book that said, autocracies always prioritize information control as the rulers are always distrustful of the population they govern. How do you connect that part of the book with Pegasus?
So what is Pegasus? Pegasus is something that has been used by a state actor to gather information. You see what kind of journalists are targeted, what kind of opposition leaders are targeted. What you realize is that it's not mass surveillance and it's not pro-BJP people or anti-BJP people. These are all journalists who actually talk to a lot of sources, collect a lot of information. They're not the most famous journalists of the country who come on 9 p.m. primetime TV shows and speak against the government or for the government. They're mostly journalists who are into the information gathering space. And what the government wants ultimately to be able to control people is the information on people. So Pegasus has to be seen in that context of trying to control the information environment, one. The second part is that whoever conjures up a reality, that reality is fragile. Whenever it conflicts with reality, like actual reality, like the government had a story about how successful it is in controlling COVID. But when the second wave came about and the actual virus started spreading, the government's entire message of how great we are and how well we've handled COVID started shattering. And a lot of people's opinions about the government's management changed because COVID was so devastating for people's own lives and for the entire nation that they just had to see the reality beyond what was being presented to them. Once these kind of things start happening, you require more and more control. How do you get more control? You capture more data about people. Aadhaar is one part of it, getting everyone to link their data to one common identifier. The second part is then to actually get into people's devices and see what they're talking, what they're thinking. A part is controlling institutions of the country. Like if you look at the statistical bodies of the country, they could release data and statistics that would disagree with the mainstream political narrative because they give out numbers. So what happens when someone's trying to control reality? They destroy the statistical bodies so that these numbers just don't come out into reality. So Pegasus is a larger, like part of this larger thing to control all the information that flows through.
Anand, do you feel you saw Pegasus coming? Because Pegasus has happened before.
Yeah, we were the first one who wrote about it in 2019 before anyone else even had wanted to write about it, along with one of my co-author, Saikatata. We actually wrote out a very interesting article in Asia Times, which kind of named the federal entity, which actually put Pegasus on most of the people's timeline. And it's kind of weird because Saika's name was also on the list, right? And so you can go back and look at it and say, why did we write the book? It was very clear during the time that who are these people whose names first came on the Pegasus list? Very interesting people in the sense that there is really nothing interesting about them, right? I mean, the first set of people whose names was on the Pegasus list, they are not interesting people at all. They are basically beaten down activists, as we call them. I mean, sure, they make quite a bit of, create quite a bit of problems for government, but on the larger scale, do they really require a $1 million weapon to be put on them? The answer is no. So you look at it and say, what's the first pattern? The first pattern is very uninteresting people, right? And why would you spend $1 million weapon on an uninteresting person, right? To do what, really? And so you go back and look at that and see the list that came out. It was very clear to us on 2019 when we put out the list, this is information control. This is not about national security. This is not about some weird sense of, oh my God, there is a hostile nation and there are people who are basically spying for the hostile nation and so on and so on. It's ideological, it's political. And that is exactly what the list has now come back. Now, every person on the list is very interesting. It's an election commissioner, it is their own persons, and then it is journalists, it is some people from the Ivy, I don't know. I think this list is like so huge. The only way in which you can reinterpret and saying this has got nothing with NatSec, this is information control. That's the book. And that's the whole point of the book, in the sense that what is the next other countries which do it? The other countries which do it are Russia, the Arab countries, Tunisia, Morocco, which are all the places where the list is there. And we had actually talked about those countries as countries which are increasingly autocratic and kind of made it up. So that's the reason why me and Shivam agree on the fact that we kind of predicted it because we knew this is basically the architecture of the state. And you see one instance before and you see those people are very uninteresting people.
All right, so we have about 15 minutes left. So I also want to talk about Prime Minister Modi because the book also speaks about Prime Minister Modi and how he's good at social media and creating his own reality, if I have that correct. Shivam, let's start with you. What do you think of the Prime Minister's ability to not deal with the press, but use social media?
So, very interesting person and very capable person when it comes to constructing a reality for people. So we actually noticed this really long back that he engages with the media, engages with social media on his own terms. He does not fall into other people's realities, doesn't even acknowledge them really. So if you look at what happened after 2002, he just refused to interact with the media, and that refusal to interact, that refusal to give interviews, to do press conferences, that exists still even right now. He's realized, he was the first person, I believe, to realize just what kind of potential these social media platforms provided. And that's why BJP's IT cell and BJP's digital mechanism was so strong, because when it happened, they were in the opposition. They needed tools to get their message across. So they identified social media as an excellent channel to do it, spent huge amounts of money on it, built huge teams of people to actually go out and do it. So Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp messaging, to automatically send WhatsApp messages to thousands of groups across the country. They built these capabilities. What's happened since then? They came into power very successfully. But in 2017-18, other people and other political parties, other activists, people in the opposition started realizing the value of all of these, and they started to build too. They started building their own Facebook pages, Twitter accounts, and the dominance that BJP once had started going down, and noticeably so. Like if you're on Twitter, then you couldn't criticize the prime minister before like 2017-18. You'd just be flooded by trolls. That thing does not exist to the same extent anymore. So what do you do to handle such a situation where you're losing the absolute advantage that you have? You have to start targeting the institutions which will give you power over these platforms. One way to do it is to get your own people employed at these tech companies. People favorable to your own interests get, like if you look at the stories in the Wall Street Journal that came out about Ankhi Das, the policy head of Facebook in India, and about her proximity to the BJP. So that is one way to handle it. The second way to handle is to actually legislate that if we send you a notice to take down information, to take down accounts, to take down content, you have to do it. Otherwise, we are going to arrest your person in India. So this fight is also a fight for BJP to get back its dominance, which they had for a really long time, but which has declined in the past few years.
All right. Anand, I wanted to ask you about the framework that the book has for kind of analyzing these methods of creating realities. It's called the ON3C: objective, narrative, context, campaign, and content. So one example is the love jihad example. Anand, has love jihad been, is it successful?
From the point of view of an adversary, in terms of like taking root in the population, I would probably contribute as largely successful because look at it, right? I mean, once upon a time, the concept didn't even exist. I mean, you would be laughed out of the room if you essentially said it about 6-7 years ago. Okay, it's extreme fringe, right? Now you apply and you look at where we are, you are probably talking about legislation on some states being passed, saying that this is problematic, I would cut it down, and so on and so on. So what is once upon a time extreme fringe and laughable and not even worth engaging is now mainstream conversation. And so that is what we call as bringing something into reality, right? I mean, whether it is true or not, it really doesn't matter at this point of time because it's a mainstream conversation. So I would probably say it's a very successful information operation. And the framework of ON3CR is basically how you bring it about it. It's the same thing with the Trump thing. Every person in the US used to laugh about his chances of winning the election in 2016. It came into reality, and he himself didn't expect it, to be honest, if you look at some of the statements. And then in 2020, everyone said his claims of election manipulation is wrong, but you see about 35% to 40% of the American population, 33% to 40% of the American population believe that 2020 election is stolen from him. Is that not a success? We would say it is a success. It has fundamentally changed dynamics. So in a way, the Love Jihad campaign is also a success.
And the objective, the book says, of the Love Jihad campaign was to consolidate the Hindu vote bank. Has that been achieved? Do you think so?
Yeah, Shivam knows the answer best for that.
Yes, almost certainly. So you have to see it, that framework exists because there is an objective. And then there are multiple narratives that you spread and multiple contents that you create to solidify that objective. Love jihad is one part of it because you already have a pre-existing belief in society that, okay, Muslims want their population to grow. It's a pre-existing notion. So love jihad is one part. The population bill is another part to it. Just the crimes and okay, Muslims tried to infect people with COVID, like that entire thing that happened is one part of it. The larger objective is consolidation of the Hindu votes, and I would say it's been quite successful, especially looking at the events that are happening in New Delhi right now, with people going and shouting slogans at Jantar Mantar, basically talking about killing Muslims and lynching Muslims right next to the Indian Parliament right now.
So are we saying alternate reality means misinformation? Are we saying it's a fake thing? Are we saying it's a fake reality? What are we saying here?
So not really. So the framework that we started with, like Anand and I discussed this a lot, there is no such thing as absolute reality. Your reality and my reality could be absolutely different based on the information that we see. Your perception is based on just what you know about the world, the pre-existing biases that you have. It all comes together. So there are multiple alternate realities that exist at any point of time. Like this reality can exist that, okay, Narendra Modi is the best prime minister in the country, and the reality can exist that Narendra Modi is the worst prime minister in the country, and these can exist at the same point of time. The reason that we think the book is extremely important right now is because society is getting divided based on the information and based on people's beliefs. There is just so much that a society can take. If everyone's on the same page on what reality is, conflicts don't happen, even if it's entirely false. But out here, what's going to happen is that people are going to believe in different facts and different versions of events altogether. And that is going to lead to societal conflicts inevitably.
Okay. Yeah. Did you want to add to that?
Yeah. So you think about it, right? I mean, you just take the left, the cars should stay on the left side of the road versus cars should stay on the right side of the road. You see America following a different system. You see India following a different system. Two different realities. What is reality? It is just societal norms, right? And so as long as people agree on that rule, you will not see accidents. But suddenly here in India, you would see everyone driving on different sides. One set of people saying left is right, the set of people saying right is left. You're going to have accidents. You're going to have deaths. And in every time where people are so divided and no reconciliation is possible between all parties who believe on certain facts, there has always been war. There has always been bloodshed. You can see it going back to Europe. You can see going back to 1920s, World War I, II, III, IV. And so we are in a state where most of the democracies and most of the countries whom you call as democracies are basically getting horizontally split. I mean, a lot of reconciliation between people who are inhabiting the country's borders are getting a lot more worried, where they're thinking, I can't be in the same room with the other person. I mean, it has happened between family members, to be pretty honest, between all of us, right? And so at that point of time, you only have conflict. You only have warfare and you have bloodshed. This has always been history. And so that is the part that worries us the most, because if you don't revert it, regimes and countries which believe on different alternative realities usually only try to reconcile them in the battlefield. This has been history.
All right. So as we wrap up, if we spot patterns of alternate reality or of someone trying to manipulate our reality to gain their objective, whatever it is, so what do we do? If we're too educated and then we are manipulated by them, we're too educated. So, I mean, how do we deal with this? Shiva, do you want to start?
I'll actually let Anand start on this one.
Okay.
Okay. So we have this historical thing in software called redeem your own brain. That is by saying, so here is how we normally work on intelligence in terms of intelligence operations. We come back and say, look, nothing in intelligence gathering is kind of fixed. I mean, it's all slightly speculative, some facts, some aspects, and so on and so on. So what you normally do when you face intelligence is you write a daily brief to your officer, which is called the IR, in the intelligence report or intelligence brief. And you basically lay down a scenario and say that, look, this is basically what my interpretation of data means, and you give it to them. And we normally have a situation where you get a team of intelligent analysts. It happens in cyber. Like we are somehow trying to say, oh, this cyber attack is done by that party. I mean, like 5 people are given a data book and they arrive at a conclusion and they present it separately to their individual superiors. And they look at it and say, if all the 5 people agree to the same set of facts, then maybe some groupthink is going on here. Okay. So we get a third person, the 6th person, or the 11th person, and say, look, counter everything what these 5 people are saying, go and present a different version of how to interpret the facts. This is called red teaming. It happens a lot in the field that we work on. So one way in which you can think about how to counter your own brain is to come back and say, are you really sure that what you believe is actually truth or it is manipulated? I mean, that is the first question. A lot of people don't even want to ask the first question because of societal pressure. So in our case, people come back and say, if my mommy believes it, my daddy believes it, my brother believes it, maybe my dog has 3 legs. Okay. So that is how you go to a place where you come back and say, maybe it is not what it is, right? And so this is the part of critical thinking. It takes a very long time for people to develop it because it's so contrary to the way in which we are educated in India. But only very few people whose domain is intelligence gathering, data analysis, kind of understand it. So one way you can start is by saying that just ask questions, more questions. And it is something that my 7-year-old asks all the time if I don't shut him up. And some of his questions are insanely intelligent that I just basically say, well, I think you have to grow up for me to answer truthfully. So in one aspect, you can go back and say, maybe we should just ask too many questions about ourselves. And that is exactly the first chapter of the book. If you talk about Vishwamitra, the sage, he basically asked too many questions about himself. What is reality? What is my mind? I mean, we have a very rich philosophical tradition in India where people experimented with their own minds. I think you've lost it. And so that is probably where you want to start. If you want to think about the new world, then maybe you should just go back to the old world.
Shivam, do you want to add anything?
So that is one part of it where we have to all become more questioning as individuals. One part of the solution will also ultimately come from technological development, I personally believe, just because the way that things are headed, the tech companies, societies, democracies around the world, it's a problem for all of them. It's not just an India specific issue. It's also a geopolitical problem when you think about the conflict between the US, China, and how India is a party to it. The conflict will not be a military war. It's ultimately going to be an information war and a cyber war to convince the rest of the world that their version of governance is better, their systems are better. It's in other countries' interest to support either this side or that side. So this information space getting cleaned up is something that technology companies will also have to address. But where we are concerned, our primary job should be to create a society and a civilization that's actually just immune to these things, because it's a questioning culture. It's a culture that actually questions itself, the information that they see, who wants to understand and get to the reality instead of just playing to their own self biases and preconceived notions. So that is our primary target for sure.
All right. So on that note, I'm going to wrap this session of Soft Cover up. Anand, Shivam, thank you so much for your time and congratulations once again on the book. This is the cover. Go grab a copy for yourselves and thank you once again. So for the print, this is Regina Mindakulusurio. Hope you learned something. I certainly did. It's actually a very good read. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Bye.
Bye.